I was running routine diagnostics on the Truman server cluster at Fort Bragg. It was 3 a.m., and I was absent-mindedly rotating a styrofoam cup of coffee that had gone stone cold hours ago. Suddenly, the screens flickered. Amidst the sea of safe green code, a line of text blazed in urgent red, appearing and vanishing in a heartbeat. Protocol D9, Command Override. My stomach knotted, a wave of nausea rising in my throat. My fingers froze over the keyboard, paralyzed before I could even think to hit the screenshot command. The chill from the server room's AC unit seemed to seep straight into my spinal cord, making me shiver despite my heavy fleece jacket. A large, heavy hand slammed down on my shoulder, nearly knocking me out of my chair. The smell of cheap tobacco and sour, stale sweat instantly suffocated the air around me. "You seeing something you shouldn't be seeing, Mills?" It was the voice of Master Sergeant Harlan. He wasn't asking. He was accusing. I stared at my reflection in the now black monitor. A small E4 specialist being swallowed whole by the shadow of a giant. Why would a single line of code make my superior officer tremble with suppressed rage? And would I survive the night to find the answer? Harlan didn't let go of my shoulder. His fingers, thick like sausages and calloused from years of gripping things he probably shouldn't have, dug into my collarbone. It was calculated, just painful enough to serve as a warning, but not hard enough to leave a bruise that could be documented. He leaned in close, invading my personal space until I could feel the heat radiating off his neck. His breath smelled like rancid coffee and chewing tobacco. "I told you what to do, Mills," he growled, his voice a low rumble near my ear. "Check the cables, don't play detective." With a sharp, dismissive motion, he shoved my shoulder, his other hand swiping across the desk. My styrofoam cup tipped over. The cold, brownish liquid splashed across the desk and dripped onto the linoleum floor, pooling near my boots. He didn't apologize. He just stood there, towering over me, a smirk playing on his lips as he looked down at the mess. "Look at that," he sneered. "Look how clumsy you are. Clean it up. Then get the hell back to the barracks. I don't want to see your face until General Ross arrives." I bit my lip, tasting the metallic tang of blood, and said nothing. I grabbed a handful of brown paper towels and crouched down. I wiped up the spill in silence, scrubbing at the floor like a maid, while a master sergeant of the United States Army watched me with the disdain of a plantation owner looking at a field hand. I didn't go back to the barracks immediately. I ducked into the women's latrine at the end of the hallway, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking. I splashed freezing cold water onto my face, trying to shock my system back into focus. The image of that red code, D9 override, was still dancing behind my eyelids. I've spent 4 years in the service memorizing every manual the Army threw at me. That protocol didn't exist in any of them. Why was Harlan so terrified? If it was just a system glitch or my incompetence, he would have screamed, written me up, or thrown the book at me. But his eyes, back there in the server room, that wasn't the look of a chaotic boss. That was the look of a man trying to hide a body. A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning ran down my spine. He wasn't protecting the system. He was protecting a secret. I walked back to the housing units in the damp, bone-chilling drizzle that passes for winter in North Carolina. The wind whipped against my face, stinging my skin. Fort Bragg at night feels like a ghost town, just concrete and shadows. Harlan's voice kept echoing in my head, mixing with the memories of my father. "You're just like your drunk of a father, Mills. Always thinking you're more important than you actually are." That comment hurt more than his grip on my shoulder. My dad didn't drink because he was a loser, or because he wanted to. He drank to drown out the sound of mortars falling on caisson. He was the most honest soldier I ever knew, a man who carried his scars quietly, and he died without a dime to his name. I jammed my hands deep into my parka pockets, clenching my fists until my knuckles popped. I wasn't going to let a corrupt bully like Harlan spit on my father's legacy. When I got back to my room, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat on the edge of my twin bed, staring at my personal laptop sitting closed on the small desk. Harlan thought he had won. He thought fear was the ultimate weapon, that if he pushed hard enough, I'd break and fall in line. That's how men like him climb the ladder, stepping on the necks of everyone below them. But he made a mistake. He forgot that when you back someone into a corner, fear changes. It hardens. It stops being about survival and starts being about the truth. My dad used to quote the Bible, Matthew 23:12. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled. If you are rooting for Hannah to take this bully down, please hit that like button to show your support. And let me know in the comments, have you ever had to deal with a bad boss like Harlan? Type justice below if you think Hannah should fight back. I reached out and flipped open the laptop lid. The screen glowed blue in the darkness, illuminating my face. If I couldn't find the answers through the official channels, through the chain of command that was clearly broken, then I would find them the way the invisible people do. You want to see clumsy Harlan? I whispered to the empty room. Watch this. I began to type. The red digits on my alarm clock read 02:14 a.m. In the bunk above me, Specialist Rodriguez was snoring with a rhythmic, wet rattle that sounded like a failing engine. Usually, I could sleep through a mortar attack. You learn to do that in basic training. But tonight, the silence between her snores felt heavy, suffocating. I stared up at the bottom of the mattress above me, tracing the wire springs with my eyes in the dark. Every time I blinked, I saw it again. That flash of red text on the Truman server. Protocol D9. It wasn't just a glitch. It felt like a tumor, something malignant growing silently inside the nervous system of the Army's network. I couldn't just lie here. My dad used to say that worrying is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do but gets you nowhere. I needed to move. I threw off my wool blanket and swung my legs out of bed, the cold linoleum floor sending a shock up my calves. Moving like a ghost, I grabbed my heavy parka and shoved my Common Access card, CAC, into the chest pocket. I didn't take my laptop. I needed more processing power than a civilian machine could offer. And I needed a connection that wouldn't trace back to my room's IP address. Outside, Fort Bragg was a different world. The daytime roar of C-130 engines and shouting drill sergeants was replaced by the hollow whistle of the wind, whipping between the brick buildings. It was a wet, miserable cold that bit through my layers. I kept my head down, avoiding the pools of yellow light from the street lamps. I wasn't heading back to the command center. Harlan would have the logs there monitored. Or worse, he might still be there. Instead, I headed for the Zone B Digital Library. It was a forgotten annex on the far side of the post, mostly used by soldiers taking online college classes or printing out leave forms. At this hour, it should be a tomb. I swiped my card at the side entrance. The reader beeped green, and the lock clicked open with a heavy mechanical thud that sounded impossibly loud in the quiet night. Inside, the library smelled of ozone, carpet cleaner, and stale popcorn. The only light came from a vending machine in the corner, its fluorescent hum buzzing like an angry insect. I ignored the rows of empty chairs and headed for a workstation tucked away in the back corner, shielded by a tall bookshelf filled with outdated field manuals. I sat down and woke the terminal. I didn't log in with my personal credentials. Instead, I used a guest maintenance profile I had created months ago for remote updates. A backdoor I kept open for lazy days when I didn't want to walk across base to fix a printer driver. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This was my world. Harlan might have the rank, the shouting voice, and the physical size, but in here, in the stream of data, he was illiterate. I was the native speaker. I tunneled into the Truman server's history logs. Search query, override command. Time frame, last 24 hours. I hit enter and waited, my heart hammering against my ribs. No results found. I frowned. I tried again. Search query, system errors. Time frame, last 24 hours. No results found. I sat back, the rolling chair creaking beneath me. That was impossible. A server cluster that size generates hundreds of minor error reports a day. Connection timeouts, packet losses, driver conflicts. It's background noise, but the log was pristine. It was spotless. It was too clean. Harlan, or whoever he was working for, hadn't just deleted the D9 record. They had scrubbed the entire day's log file to be safe. They had used a bleach program to wipe the drive. They were thorough, I'll give them that. But they were arrogant. They assumed no one would look close enough to notice the absence of the normal, everyday chaos. "You scrubbed the floor," I whispered to the screen, "but you forgot about the dust under the rug." The Army's systems are built on redundancy. They are designed to survive nuclear war. You can wipe a primary drive, but the Volume Shadow Copy Service creates automatic snapshots of the system state every time a major software change occurs. It's an automated failsafe that most non-tech people don't even know exists. I bypassed the user interface and went into the command line, digging into the hidden system volume information. I sifted through the junk files, the temporary caches, the digital trash, and there it was. Sys log backup born 47. My breath hitched. I mounted the backup image and opened the text file. It was like opening a grave. The record was there. Protocol D9, command override. But it wasn't triggered tonight. The installation timestamp was from 60 days ago, and the user account that authorized the installation wasn't Harlan's. It wasn't even a military ID. It was a contractor account. Authorization code Titan 7, Titan, a private defense contractor. The name sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't just a corrupt sergeant skimming supplies. This was corporate. This was outside money infiltrating the chain of command. "You're diligent, Mills. I'll give you that." The voice sliced through the silence like a razor. I gasped, slamming the laptop screen down so hard it cracked the plastic casing. I spun around in the chair, my heart leaping into my throat. Standing at the end of the book aisle was Lieutenant Parks, the staff duty officer for the night. He looked tired, his uniform slightly rumpled, a styrofoam cup of coffee in one hand. But his other hand was resting casually, yet intentionally, on the grip of his M9 pistol holstered at his hip. His eyes narrowed as he looked from me to the darkened computer screen. "Library closed at 2200 hours, Specialist," Parks said, his voice flat. "What are you doing here?" My mind raced. If I told him the truth, he'd report it to Harlan. If I ran, he'd tackle me. I needed a lie. A believable, pathetic lie that a high-ranking officer would dismiss without a second thought. I swallowed hard, forcing my posture to slump, making myself look smaller. I was calling my dad, sir." Parks raised an eyebrow. "At 3 a.m.? He's in a different time zone, sir," I stammered, my voice trembling. It wasn't entirely fake. I was terrified. "He's not doing well, and the reception in the barracks is terrible. I just wanted to see his face." It was a sick lie. My father was buried in a veterans cemetery 3 hours away, but invoking family issues usually made officers uncomfortable enough to back off. Parks studied me for a long, agonizing moment. The hum of the vending machine seemed to grow louder, filling the tense silence. He took a sip of his coffee, his gaze drifting to the computer, then back to my terrified face. He saw a lonely E4 missing her daddy, not a whistleblower uncovering treason. He sighed, dropping his hand from his holster. "Get back to your barracks, Mills. If I catch you out here again, it's an Article 15. Clear?" "Crystal clear, sir," I whispered, grabbing my ID card. "Go." I walked past him, keeping my head down, trying to control my breathing. My legs felt like jelly. As I pushed through the heavy exit doors and back into the biting wind, I didn't look back. I had nearly been caught. The net was closing in. But as I sprinted through the shadows back to my room, one word burned in my mind, hotter than fear. Titan. The next day, I volunteered for the overnight shift at the technical building. It wasn't because I was eager to work. It was because I was terrified of going back to my room. I needed to avoid Harlan. I needed to be somewhere where there were supposed to be witnesses, cameras, and logs. The server building at night is a strange beast. It's a cavernous, windowless fortress of concrete and steel, usually filled with the deafening, white noise hum of cooling fans keeping the Army's brain from overheating. At 23:15, I was the only soul on the floor. I sat at a terminal in the far corner, bathed in the blue glow of the monitor, trying to dig up dirt on Titan defense. Then, the world ended. It didn't fade out. It slammed shut. With a heavy mechanical clunk, The overhead lights died. The monitors winked out. The hum of the cooling fans spun down into a groaning silence. I sat frozen in the pitch black, my hands hovering over a dead keyboard. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't right. Fort Bragg's infrastructure is designed to survive a direct hit. The backup diesel generators are hardwired to kick in within 3 seconds of a power failure. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. Silence. 10 seconds passed. The darkness remained absolute. The air grew instantly stale. This wasn't a grid failure. Someone hadn't just tripped a breaker. They had manually cut the master power and disabled the automatic transfer switch. Then, I heard it. From the long linoleum-lined hallway outside the server room, a sound emerged from the silence. Clomp, clomp, clomp. It was the heavy, rhythmic thud of standard-issue combat boots hitting the vinyl tile. Slow, deliberate. These weren't the hurried steps of a technician rushing to fix the outage. These were the steps of a predator who knew exactly where his prey was hiding. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. I couldn't be seen. I slid out of my chair, dropping silently to the floor. I crawled into the tight crawl space under the desk, pulling my knees to my chest, making myself as small as possible. I wrapped my arms around my shins to stop them from shaking. The footsteps grew louder. Clomp, clomp. They stopped right outside the glass doors of the server room. I heard the hydraulic hiss of the door being pushed open. It groaned on its hinges, a dry metallic screech that sounded like a scream in the quiet room. I pressed my hands over my mouth to stifle the sound of my own jagged breathing. A beam of light sliced through the darkness. It was the harsh, blue-white beam of a tactical LED flashlight. It swept across the room, dancing over the rows of silent server racks, hunting. The beam moved closer to my desk. Then came the smell. It drifted under the desk before he did. A suffocating mix of cheap, stale cigarette smoke and sour, unwashed sweat. It was the scent of a man who drank his breakfast and wore his uniform like a threat. Harlan. He didn't shout. He didn't call out my name. That would have been less terrifying. Instead, he walked slowly around the room. I could hear him tapping something against the metal edges of the desks. Tap, tap, tap. It was his baton. The collapsible steel baton carried by military police. "I know you're in here, Mouse," he whispered. His voice was low, intimate, and terrifyingly calm. It echoed softly off the hard surfaces. "You think the dark protects you? The dark is my friend, Mills. Not yours." I squeezed my eyes shut. Tears leaked out, hot and stinging. In my head, I recited the only thing that could keep me from screaming. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. The footsteps stopped. He was standing right in front of my desk. I could see the toes of his boots through the small gap under the modesty panel. He stood there for what felt like an eternity. I held my breath until my lungs burned. "Soldiers who dig into things they don't understand," Harlan murmured, almost sadly. "They tend to drown." Suddenly, crash! The baton slammed down onto the desktop directly above my head. I jerked violently, a silent scream dying in my throat, my head banging against the underside of the desk. The sound was like a gunshot in the confined space. Dust rained down on my hair. "Consider this your only warning," he hissed. He didn't bend down to look at me. He didn't need to. He knew I was there, trembling in the dirt. He wanted me to know that he could reach me anywhere. The boots turned. Clomp, clomp, clomp. He walked away, the rhythm just as slow, just as deliberate. Seconds later, the overhead lights flickered and buzzed back to life, blindingly bright. The hum of the servers roared back on, drowning out the sound of my sobbing. I crawled out from under the desk, my body shaking so hard I could barely stand. I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. There, on the laminate surface where I had been working just minutes ago, was a deep, jagged dent. The particle board was cracked and splintered. I ran a trembling finger over the ruined wood. That wasn't just a threat. That was a promise. If I had been sitting in that chair, I realized then that the game had changed. I wasn't fighting for my career anymore. I was fighting for my life. The next morning, the sun rose over Fort Bragg, but it brought no warmth. I walked into the company changing room with dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. My body still ached from crouching under that desk, but my mind was numb. I spun the combination lock on my metal locker, right 24, left 10, right 32. The latch clicked, and I swung the door open. A thick yellow manila envelope tumbled out from the top shelf, hitting the concrete floor with a heavy slap. My heart skipped a beat. There was no postage, no return address, just my name, Mills, scrawled in black marker. I picked it up, my hands trembling slightly. Inside were official Army transfer orders, draft copies not yet filed but fully prepared. Destination: Fort Greely, Alaska. My stomach dropped. Greely wasn't just a base, it was the Siberia of the Army. It was where they sent missile defense crews and soldiers they wanted to forget. It was endless night, 50 degrees below zero, and total isolation. It was a career graveyard. But there was something else clipped to the orders. A handwritten note on a piece of notebook paper. Option A, Alaska. Option B, Leavenworth Military Prison for Espionage. Option C, shut your mouth, erase your search history, and receive a stellar performance evaluation this year. Your choice. The signature at the bottom was a jagged, arrogant scrawl. MSG Harlan. He wasn't just threatening me with a stick anymore. He was offering a poisoned carrot. He was giving me a way out, the coward's way out. I couldn't breathe in that room. I shoved the envelope into my cargo pocket and bolted out the back door, heading for the parking lot behind the barracks. I needed someone. Anyone. I pulled out my phone and dialed the only number I had left. My Aunt Martha in Virginia. She was the only family I had after Dad died, a woman hardened by years of factory work and disappointment. Aunt Martha? I whispered when she picked up. It's Hannah. Hannah? It's a Tuesday morning. Why aren't you at work? Her voice was gruff, suspicious. I'm in trouble, Auntie. Big trouble. There's something going on at the unit. My boss is corrupt, and I think they're hurting the country. And... Stop. She cut me off, her voice cold and tired. Don't start with this crusade nonsense. Your father spent his whole life fighting Void the man, and look where it got him. Dead broke and bitter. But they threatened to send me to Alaska, I pleaded, tears hot in my eyes. Then go to Alaska, she snapped. Do your job, collect your paycheck, keep your head down. Don't be a fool like your father was. Nobody cares about a hero, Hannah. They care about rent. The line clicked dead. I stared at the phone, the silence ringing in my ears louder than a siren. I leaned back against the rough brick wall of the barracks and slid down until I hit the pavement. I buried my face in my knees. The one tether I had to the outside world had just been severed. I was completely, utterly alone. Lunchtime arrived, and hunger forced me to the dining facility, DFAC. It was a mistake. The mess hall was loud, filled with the clatter of plastic trays and the roar of soldiers talking over one another. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and dry meatloaf. I grabbed a tray, my head down, trying to be invisible. But Harlan was holding court at the center table. He was surrounded by his sycophants, young corporals who laughed too loud at his jokes. As I walked past with my tray of watery mashed potatoes, the laughter stopped. Harlan didn't look at me. He just raised his voice enough to carry over the din. You know, boys, he boomed, some rats don't realize they belong in the sewer, not at the dinner table. The table erupted in laughter. The sound washed over me like toxic waste. My face burned with humiliation. I didn't stop. I walked to the farthest corner of the room, near the conveyor belt where we returned dirty trays. I sat alone, chewing food that tasted like ash. He wanted me to feel small. He wanted me to feel like garbage. And for a moment, it worked. I looked at the exit sign and thought about Alaska. At least in the snow, no one would mock me. But as I looked at Harlan, laughing with his mouth full, the shame in my gut began to curdle into something else. Something hotter. Anger. Rats in the sewer, I thought. Fine, I'll show you what a rat can do. I stood up to dump my tray. I walked to the recycling station next to the trash cans. The bins were overflowing. The janitorial staff hadn't cleared them yet. That's when I saw it. Sitting right on top of the paper-only bin was a crumpled ball of paper. It caught my eye because of the logo printed on the header, visible through the wrinkles. A stylized shield with a sword. Titan Defense. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked around. No one was watching the trash area. They were all watching Harlan. I reached out, snatched the paper, and shoved it into my pocket. I hurried out of the diafique and ducked around the corner before smoothing it out. It was a shipping receipt from FedEx. Recipient: MSG Thomas Harlan. Sender: Titan Defense Solutions, Arlington, VA. Content description: encrypted storage device, iron key. Delivery date: yesterday. I stared at the paper, my hands shaking. Harlan was arrogant. He was so confident in his power, so sure that I was a terrified mouse, that he hadn't even bothered to shred the evidence. He had just tossed a direct link to a defense contractor into a recycling bin in a public cafeteria. He'd given me a choice: Alaska or silence. I looked at the receipt, then back at the double doors where Harlan was still laughing. Option D, Sergeant, I whispered. I'm coming for that key. General Ross and the Inspector General's team were scheduled to touch down at War 08 tomorrow morning. That meant I had less than 6 hours to prove treason, or I was on a one-way flight to Alaska. Outside, a massive winter storm, a classic North Carolina nor'easter, was hammering the base. Ice pellets hit the brick walls like buckshot, and the wind howled through the power lines. It was miserable weather for a soldier, but perfect weather for a thief. The storm was wreaking havoc on the older electrical grids, causing the external security cameras to flicker and loop. I slipped into the administrative building, shaking the sleet off my parka. The hallway was dark and deserted. I stopped in front of Master Sergeant Harlan's office door. Locked, of course. But Harlan was a creature of habit and, more importantly, of arrogance. He believed he owned this unit. He believed no one would dare touch his things. I looked at the dusty, fake ficus plant standing in the corner of the hallway. It was an office cliché. I crouched down and felt around the plastic soil at the base of the pot. My fingers brushed against cold metal. Unbelievable, I whispered, shaking my head. I pulled out a small brass key. It was the oldest, laziest trick in the book, but Harlan wasn't a mastermind. He was just a bully who thought he was untouchable. I unlocked the door and slipped inside, closing it softly behind me. The office smelled stale, a mixture of old carpet, lemon pledge, and the distinct, sweet burn of Jim Beam bourbon. I didn't turn on the lights. I used the small tactical red light on my keychain to scan the room. I went straight to the desk. I pulled open the drawers, rifling through paperwork, loose chewing tobacco tins, and performance evaluations. Nothing. No encrypted drives. I paused, closing my eyes, trying to think like him. The receipt said encrypted storage device. An iron key isn't something you throw in a drawer with paper clips. It's valuable. Harlan would want it close, but hidden. He loved trophies. He loved displaying his power. I shined my light on the bookshelf behind his desk. It was lined with coins and awards he probably took credit for. In the center sat a large, detailed plastic model of an M1 Abrams tank. He polished that thing more than his own boots. I walked over to it. I lifted the turret. It was heavy. I tilted the tank forward. Clink. Something slid out of the hollow barrel and hit the wooden shelf. It was a black USB drive. Heavy, rubberized, military grade. An iron key. Gotcha, I breathed. Now came the dangerous part. An iron key is hardware encrypted. Without the password, it's a brick. If I guessed wrong 10 times, it would self-destruct the data. I sat in Harlan's leather chair and woke up his desktop computer. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I plugged the drive in, enter password. I stared at the prompt. What would a narcissist use? I tried his birthday. Access denied. Attempts remaining. 9. I tried his service number. Access denied. Attempts remaining. 8. I took a breath. Think. The receipt was from Titan Defense. He had sold his soul to them. To him, that connection wasn't a crime. It was his golden parachute. It was the most important thing in his life right now. I typed Titan 123, processing. Access granted. I almost laughed out loud. He was so lazy. The drive opened. I clicked on the folders, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't just the D9 source code. It was a ledger. A digital paper trail of treason. There were screenshots of crypto wallets, Bitcoin, and Monero. Hundreds of thousands of dollars transferred into anonymous accounts. And next to them were the deliverables. Backdoor access, 82nd Airborne Logistics. Communications override protocols. Grid shutdown specs. He hadn't just installed a glitch. He had sold the keys to the kingdom. If a conflict broke out, Titan Defense, or whoever was paying them, could shut down our communications before we even loaded a rifle. He had sold the safety of every soldier in this division for internet money. I pulled my personal external hard drive out of my pocket and plugged it in. Copying files. The progress bar crawled. 20%, 45%. Suddenly, a red light washed over the room. It wasn't a siren. It was worse. The computer screen flashed crimson. Unauthorized peripheral detected. Silent alarm triggered. No, 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 I hissed. He had a software tripwire. 80%. I looked out the window. Through the swirling snow, I saw blue and red strobe lights reflecting off the ice. The MPs were already at the perimeter. 95%. I heard the heavy front doors of the building slam open downstairs. Boots, heavy, fast, and angry, were thundering up the stairwell. 100%. I yanked both drives out of the computer. I couldn't go out the hallway. They would cut me off before I reached the stairs. Freeze! Military police! A voice roared from the floor below. I looked at the window. We were on the second floor. Below me, the snow had drifted high against the side of the building, maybe 4 feet deep. I didn't think. I couldn't think. I jammed the drives into my zippered pocket and climbed onto the radiator. The doorknob to the office began to turn. I threw the window sash up, the freezing wind hitting me like a physical blow. As the office door kicked open with a splintering crash, I pushed myself off the sill and jumped into the white void. The clock on the wall of the Tactical Operations Center, TOC, read 08 sharp. The room was a sanctuary of power. It smelled of floor wax, polished mahogany, and expensive coffee. The good stuff reserved for officers, not the sludge we drank in the motor pool. Around the massive conference table sat the gods of Fort Bragg, full-bird colonels, majors with chests full of ribbons, and at the head of the table, General Ross. 4 stars gleamed on his shoulders under the harsh fluorescent lights. I stood in the very back row of the gallery, squeezed between a water cooler and a stack of maps. I didn't belong here. My uniform was still damp from the snowdrift I had jumped into hours ago. My boots were muddy. My hair was a frizzy disaster. I clutched my external hard drive against my chest like a shield, my knuckles white. At the front of the room, Master Sergeant Harlan stood next to a large projection screen. He looked immaculate. His uniform was pressed sharp enough to cut skin. His boots shone like black glass. He radiated confidence. He glanced at me for a split second. His eyes were cold, amused. It was a look that said, "You're dead, Mills. You're just a bug on my windshield." He turned back to the general, clicking a remote. A slide appeared, filled with comforting green charts. General Ross. Harlan's voice was smooth, practiced. As you can see, the Truman diagnostic came back 100% clean. All security protocols are active. The grid is green across the board. We are fully mission capable. General Ross sat like a granite statue. He didn't smile. He just nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the data. Harlan continued, his voice swelling with pride. My team has worked through the night to ensure. It was the lie. It wasn't just a fib or a cover-up. It was a lie that would kill people. As he spoke, the green charts on the screen blurred in my vision. I didn't see data. I saw soldiers deployed in foreign deserts, calling for air support on radios that wouldn't work because Harlan had sold the backdoor codes. I saw my father, coughing in his wheelchair, holding my hand and telling me that a soldier's only currency is their honor. Silence in the face of evil is complicity. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought the colonel sitting in front of me could hear it. If I spoke, my career was over. If I stayed silent, my soul was gone. I took a breath. It felt like inhaling broken glass. "That's a lie, sir." The words ripped out of my throat, shaky but loud, cutting through the sterile air of the room. The effect was instant. It was like a grenade had gone off. The silence that followed was absolute. Every head in the room, 30 of the most powerful officers in the U.S. Army, snapped around to look at the back of the room. They saw a wet, shivering E4 specialist daring to interrupt a briefing. Harlan's face transformed. The smug mask shattered, replaced by a flash of purple rage. "Specialist Mills!" he roared, abandoning all military decorum. He marched toward me, his heavy boots thudding on the carpet. "Get out! Get out of this room immediately! You are dismissed." He turned to the MPs standing by the door. "Remove her. She's clearly intoxicated or having a mental breakdown. Get her out of my sight." Two large military police officers stepped forward, reaching for my arms. I shrank back against the wall, hugging the drive tighter. I was about to be dragged out, silenced, and buried. "Stop!" The word cracked like a whip. It didn't come from the MPs. It came from the head of the table. General Ross hadn't moved a muscle, but his voice filled the room with terrifying authority. The MPs froze in their tracks. Harlan stopped mid-stride, his mouth hanging open. Slowly, terrifyingly, General Ross stood up. He didn't look at Harlan. He looked past him, straight at me. His eyes were steel gray, unreadable, and piercing. He was looking into my soul. "Master Sergeant, take your seat," Ross ordered, his voice low and dangerous. "But General, she's—" Harlan started. "Sit down." Harlan crumpled into the nearest chair, sweating. General Ross raised a finger and pointed it directly at my face. "You, young lady, step forward." My legs felt like lead. I forced myself to walk past the rows of staring officers. I could feel their judgment burning my skin. Who does she think she is? Look at her uniform. Disgraceful. I stopped at the end of the long mahogany table. I was trembling uncontrollably. "You just called your superior officer a liar in front of the Inspector General," Ross said, his voice quiet but echoing in the silent room. "That is insubordination. That is a career-ending offense." He leaned forward, placing his knuckles on the table. "You better have proof, Specialist. Because if you're wasting my time, you won't just be discharged. You will be court-martialed by this afternoon." I swallowed hard. The lump in my throat tasted like fear and bile. This was it. The point of no return. If you're rooting for Hannah to take down this corrupt bully right now, please hit that like button. And tell me in the comments, what would you do in this situation? Would you speak up or stay silent? Type, "Speak up" if you're with Hannah. I didn't salute. I didn't apologize. I walked past the general, straight to the presentation laptop connected to the main server. Harlan made a move to stop me, but a glare from Ross froze him in his seat. I pulled the black USB cable from my pocket. My hands were shaking so bad I missed the port on the first try. I took a deep breath, steadied my hand, and jammed the connector in. "It's not just a lie, General," I whispered, my voice gaining strength as the files appeared on the massive screen behind me. I turned to face the room, pointing at the damning evidence of crypto transfers and sold codes. "It's treason." The silence in the Tactical Operations Center was so heavy it felt like physical pressure. My hands were trembling so violently that I mistyped the first character of the password. I took a sharp, jagged breath, steadied my fingers, and typed TITAN123. I hit enter. The massive projection screen behind me flickered. Harlan's fabricated green readiness charts vanished. In their place, the raw, ugly truth of his computer's hard drive exploded onto the wall in high definition. It was a digital autopsy of treason. On the left side of the screen were the chat logs with Titan admin explicitly discussing the installation of the backdoor. On the right was the ledger. It was a transaction history for a Monero cryptocurrency wallet. Transfers of $50,000, $100,000. Payments made on the exact dates the security protocols were disabled. And at the bottom, glowing in undeniable text. User authentication. MSG T. Harlan. A collective gasp swept through the room. It sounded like the air being sucked out of an airlock. Chairs scraped against the floor as 30 high-ranking officers leaned forward in disbelief. General Ross stood up slowly. His face, usually unreadable, had hardened into a mask of cold fury. He walked around the long mahogany table, his eyes fixed on the screen, verifying the data with the precision of a hawk. Then he turned to Harlan. "Explain this, Master Sergeant," Ross said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a lethal weight that terrified me more than Harlan's shouting ever did. Harlan stood by the podium, his face draining of all color. He looked like a man watching his parachute fail to open. The arrogance, the swagger, the "I own this base" attitude. It all evaporated. Sweat beaded instantly on his forehead. "General..." "Sir?" Harlan stammered, his hands fluttering uselessly in the air. It's a fabrication. That girl, she's a hacker. She planted it. She's trying to frame me because I disciplined her for incompetence." It was a desperate, pathetic lie. The timestamp on the files clearly showed they were created months ago, long before I ever touched his computer. "You're telling me," Ross cut in, his voice dropping an octave, "that a specialist E4 hacked a hardware-encrypted iron key, planted 6 months of financial records, and spoofed your digital signature, all while being chased by MPs in a snowstorm." Harlan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked small. For the first time, I didn't see a giant. I saw a greedy, middle-aged man who had sold his country for internet money. "That's enough," Ross snapped. He looked toward the double doors. "Provost Marshal, Military Police." The doors swung open. 2 MP officers, towering figures in tactical vests, marched into the room. "Secure this man," Ross ordered, pointing a finger at Harlan like a weapon. "Master Sergeant Harlan is under arrest for suspicion of espionage, sabotage, and treason against the United States. Relieve him of his weapon and his command immediately." The MPs moved with practiced efficiency. They grabbed Harlan by the shoulders and spun him around. He tried to pull away, knocking over a pitcher of ice water on the conference table. The crash of glass and splashing water shattered the professional atmosphere of the room. "Get your hands off me," Harlan screamed, his voice cracking. "Do you know who I am? I run this unit. This is a mistake." Click, click, click. The sound of the steel handcuffs ratcheting tight around his wrists was dry, mechanical, and final. It was the sound of a 20-year career snapping in half. Thomas Harlan, the lead MP, recited the Article 31 warning. "You have the right to remain silent." As they dragged him toward the door, Harlan's eyes locked onto me. He wasn't scary anymore. He looked wild, like a trapped animal. "You little rat!" he screamed, spitting flecks of foam. "You ruined everything. You think you're a hero? You're nothing. You hear me, Mills? You're garbage!" He kept screaming obscenities as they hauled him into the hallway. The heavy doors slammed shut, cutting off his voice. The room fell into a stunned silence. The only sound was the hum of the projector fan and the wind howling outside. The other officers in the room, men and women who had trusted him, eaten with him, served with him, looked down at the table, shame burning on their faces. They had let a predator live among them, and it took a mouse to expose him. I stood by the laptop, my hands still resting on the mouse. The adrenaline that had fueled me for the last 12 hours, through the library, the crawl space, the snow jump, and the confrontation, suddenly vanished. It was like someone pulled the plug. My knees buckled. I didn't swoon or faint gracefully like in the movies. I collapsed. My legs just stopped working, and I hit the carpeted floor hard. I pulled my knees to my chest and buried my face in my hands. And then, I broke. I sobbed. "Great," heaving sobs that shook my entire body. I cried for the fear of the last 2 days. I cried for the humiliation of cleaning up the coffee. I cried for the threat of Alaska, for the rejection of my aunt, and for the sheer, overwhelming terror of standing alone against a giant. I felt sick. Watching Harlan get dragged away didn't make me feel happy. It just made me feel empty. It was a tragedy that it had even come to this. I heard footsteps approaching. Not the heavy clomp of combat boots, but the firm, steady stride of dress shoes. A hand settled on my shoulder. It wasn't a grip meant to hurt or control. It was warm, heavy, and reassuring. I looked up through my tears. General Ross was kneeling on the floor next to me, a 4-star general ruining the crease of his trousers to get on my level. He wasn't looking at me like an officer looks at a subordinate. He was looking at me like a father looks at a child who has just survived a car wreck. He reached into his pocket and handed me a clean white handkerchief. "Wipe your face, specialist," he said softly. I took it, wiping the snot and tears from my face, trying to compose myself. I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry I made a scene." General Ross shook his head. He gripped my shoulder tighter, pulling me slightly upward. "Don't you ever apologize for the truth," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Stand up, daughter. Soldiers don't kneel after a victory." General Ross led me away from the chaos of the Tactical Operations Center. We walked past the whispering aides and the saluting guards, down a quiet corridor that smelled of lemon polish and history. He opened a heavy oak door and gestured for me to enter. His private office was a different world. It was a sanctuary of dark mahogany and leather, illuminated by the soft light of a desk lamp. The walls were lined with books and memorabilia, folded flags in triangular cases, challenge coins from deployments in the desert, and photos of men who hadn't come home. I stood awkwardly in the center of the Persian rug, clutching the dirty handkerchief he had given me. I was a lowly specialist standing in the inner sanctum of a 4-star general. My instinct was to stand at parade rest and stare at the wall, but my knees were still shaking. "Sit, Hannah," Ross said gently, pointing to a leather armchair. He didn't sit behind his massive desk. Instead, he walked over to a small side table where an electric kettle sat on a silver tray. He didn't buzz for an aide. He didn't call a secretary. The commander of Fort Bragg, a man who moved armies with a single word, picked up a ceramic teapot. "Do you take sugar?" he asked, his back to me. Just straight, sir," I stammered, stunned. He poured 2 cups of steaming Earl Grey tea. He walked over and placed a delicate china cup in my calloused, dirt-stained hands. The warmth seeped through the ceramic, thawing my frozen fingers. Ross pulled a chair closer to mine and sat down. He took off his patrol cap, the one with the 4 silver stars, and placed it on the coffee table. Without the hat, he looked older. The iron facade of the general melted away, revealing a man with deep lines etched around his eyes and a weariness that went down to the bone. He took a sip of his tea, staring into the dark liquid. "You remind me of someone," he said quietly. The silence in the room was thick, but it wasn't heavy like in the briefing room. It was safe. He reached into the breast pocket of his uniform and pulled out a small worn leather wallet. He opened it and slid a photograph across the table toward me. I leaned forward. It was a picture of a young woman in army fatigues. She was standing next to a server rack, a tangle of cables in her hands, grinning at the camera with a smudge of grease on her cheek. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, just like mine. "This is Sarah," Ross said, his voice cracking slightly. "My daughter. She was a signal specialist, just like you, sharp as a tack. Could code circles around her commanding officers." I looked up at him, surprised. Is she stationed here, sir?" Ross shook his head slowly. The pain in his eyes was raw and open. 4 years ago, Sarah found a vulnerability in the logistics software at her base in Kuwait, a safety protocol that was being ignored to speed up shipments. She wrote a report. She brought it to her captain. He paused, taking a shaky breath. They told her to stay in her lane. They told her that logistics wasn't her job, and that she needed to respect the chain of command. Sarah was a good soldier. I raised her to be a good soldier. So, she listened. She stayed silent, I felt a chill run through me. I knew where this story was going. 2 weeks later, Ross whispered, an ammunition shipment was routed incorrectly due to that glitch. It detonated in the depot. Sarah was in the building next door. He looked down at his hands that had signed thousands of orders but couldn't save his own child. I buried her at Arlington, he said. And every day since then, I have lived with the guilt. Not just because she died, but because I was the one who taught her to obey. I taught her that discipline was the highest virtue. I should have taught her that courage was. He looked up, locking eyes with me. The intensity of his gaze made my breath catch. Today, when you stood up in that briefing room, when you shouted me down, I didn't see an insubordinate E4. I saw Sarah. I saw the woman my daughter should have been allowed to be. He leaned forward, his voice fierce with conviction. I swore to God at her funeral that if I ever saw that spark again, that refusal to accept a lie, I would protect it. Thank you, Hannah. You gave an old man a chance to make things right. My throat tightened. Tears welled up in my eyes again, but these weren't tears of fear. They were tears of release. All my life, I had felt like a nuisance, a mouse, a problem to be solved. My dad, I started, my voice thick. He was a Vietnam vet. He died broke. Everyone called him a loser because he wouldn't play the game. He wouldn't suck up to the bosses. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small, battered notebook I carried everywhere. My dad's handwriting was faded on the pages. He used to tell me that the truth is the only thing you can take with you when you die, I said, sliding the notebook toward the general. Ross picked it up reverently. He ran his thumb over the worn cover. In that moment, the stars on his collar and the stripes on my sleeve didn't matter. We were just two people, scarred by the system we served, finding comfort in the shadow of our ghosts. He was a wise man, your father, Ross said softly. He handed the book back to me. And he raised a hell of a daughter. I took a sip of the tea. It was still hot, bitter, and comforting. For the first time in months, the knot of anxiety in my chest loosened. I wasn't just a number on a roster. I wasn't invisible. I was seen. 1 week later, the storm had finally broken. The massive nor'easter that had buried North Carolina in ice and misery was gone, replaced by a crisp, brilliant winter sun that made the melting snow on the barracks' roofs glitter like diamonds. But the weather wasn't the only thing that had changed at Fort Bragg. The atmosphere in the unit had shifted entirely. In the Army, the scuttlebutt, the rumor mill, travels faster than a fiber optic cable. Everyone knew what had happened in the Tactical Operations Center. Everyone knew about the Iron Key, the crypto wallets, and the image of Master Sergeant Harlan being led away in handcuffs. The fear that had suffocated the unit for months had evaporated. Soldiers were walking taller. Laughter had returned to the motor pool. I walked down the hallway of the barracks, carrying a cardboard box filled with the contents of my locker. As I passed the staff duty desk, Lieutenant Parks looked up from his logbook. A week ago, he had looked at me with suspicion, his hand hovering near his holster. Today, he stood up. He didn't say a word, but he gave me a sharp, respectful nod, the kind one soldier gives another when they've earned their stripes. I nodded back, holding my head high. I wasn't packing my box because I was being kicked out. I wasn't packing for a punitive transfer to Alaska. I was packing because I had outgrown this room. At 10 hours, I reported to the main post parade field. It wasn't a mass formation with thousands of grumbling soldiers standing in the cold. It was a small, intimate ceremony, which in the military usually means it matters more. General Ross stood near the base of the main flagpole, where the stars and stripes snapped rhythmically in the breeze. Flanking him were 3 officers I didn't recognize. They wore dress blues, and on their shoulders was a patch I had only seen in magazines. A sword crossed with a lightning bolt. U.S. Cyber Command. I marched to the designated spot on the grass, my boots polished to a mirror shine, and snapped to the position of attention. "Publish the orders," General Ross commanded. The battalion adjutant stepped forward, opening a leather folder. His voice boomed across the open field, crisp and formal. Attention to orders. The President of the United States takes pleasure in presenting the Army Commendation Medal to Specialist Hannah Mills for exceptionally meritorious service. For displaying outstanding moral courage and technical expertise that directly safeguarded the operational integrity of the 82nd Airborne Division. The words washed over me: meritorious, moral courage. General Ross stepped forward. In his hands, resting on a small velvet pillow, was the medal. It was a hexagon of bronze, suspended from a ribbon of myrtle green and white, the colors of the Army. He pinned it carefully to the left breast pocket of my Class A uniform, centering it perfectly above my plastic nameplate, Mills. He leaned in close, checking the clasp. For a moment, the distance between general and specialist vanished. "Your father would be damn proud today, Hannah," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. I looked down at the medal. The metal was cold against the fabric, but it ignited a warmth in my chest that spread all the way to my fingertips. For years, the name Mills had been a punchline in this unit, synonymous with loser or drunk, the legacy of a man who couldn't fit in. Not anymore. Today, that name meant honor. I touched the edge of the metal briefly. I realized then that my father didn't need to be here to see it. He had built the foundation for it. He was the one who taught me that the truth matters even when it costs you everything. "Thank you, General," I said, my voice steady and clear. Ross stepped back and rendered a slow, crisp salute. I returned it, cutting the air with a snap. The ceremony wasn't over. One of the visiting officers, a colonel with graying temples and sharp, intelligent eyes, stepped forward. He extended his hand, bypassing the formal salute for a handshake. "Good morning, Specialist." "Actually, I should correct that," the colonel smiled. "Good morning, Sergeant Mills." My breath hitched. "Sergeant." I blinked, looking from him to General Ross. "Sir?" "This morning, a battlefield promotion was approved," the colonel said, shaking my hand firmly. "We need soldiers with cool heads and hot hearts. The 82nd is sad to lose you, but you've been drafted up to the big leagues. Your transfer orders have been cut." He handed me a new manila envelope. This one wasn't crumpled or threatening like the one Harlan had left me. It was crisp, official, and heavy with promise. "Fort Meade, Maryland," he said. "U.S. Cyber Command Headquarters. You start Monday. Pack your bags, Sergeant. You're going to help us hunt the big wolves now." I took the envelope, feeling the weight of it. Fort Meade, the NSA, the elite. It was a world away from crawling under desks and fixing printers at Fort Bragg. It was a career I hadn't dared to dream of. The winter sun reflected off the bronze medal on my chest. I looked up at the flag waving above us, then down at the stripes on my sleeve. The fear was gone. The anger was gone. The future lay open before me, wide and bright as the winter sky. The metal door of my wall locker slammed shut with a hollow metallic ring that echoed through the empty bay. It was a sound I had heard 1,000 times over the last 4 years, usually accompanied by a sense of dread or exhaustion. Today, it sounded like a gavel coming down. Case closed. I ran my hand over the gray-painted steel. The locker was empty. My uniforms, my boots, my few civilian clothes, everything was packed tight into the green duffel bag resting at my feet. There was only one thing left. Stuck to the front of the locker door, right below the ventilation slits, was a faded yellow sticky note. It had been there for 6 months. Someone, probably one of Harlan's cronies, had scrawled 2 words on it in black marker: computer mouse. It was meant to be an insult. It was meant to remind me that I was small, timid, and insignificant, that I scurried around in the dark, eating crumbs while the big dogs ate at the table. I reached out and peeled the note off the metal. The adhesive was dry and brittle. I crumbled the yellow paper in my fist, squeezing it until my knuckles turned white, and then I tossed it into the trash can by the door. I wasn't a mouse. I wasn't a lion either. I didn't need to be an apex predator to matter. I was Sergeant Hannah Mills. I was a soldier. And that was enough. I hoisted the heavy green sea bag onto my shoulder, the strap digging familiarly into my muscle, and pushed through the double doors. The air outside was cold, crisp, and shockingly clean. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the pine-scented air of North Carolina. It tasted different today. It tasted like freedom. I walked across the quad toward the pickup point. The base was busy, platoons were double-timing in formation, trucks were rumbling down the main road. But I moved at my own pace. I stopped at the edge of the parade field, right in front of the main post flagpole. It was late afternoon, and the sun was dipping below the tree line, casting long shadows across the grass. High above, the American flag, Old Glory, was snapping in the wind. The red, white, and blue fabric looked vivid against the winter sky. For a long time, I used to look at that flag with a knot in my stomach. When I looked up, I didn't see liberty. I saw Harlan's face. I saw the bureaucracy that crushed my father. I saw a system that seemed designed to protect the powerful and grind down the weak. I saw it as a blanket that covered up the lies. But today, standing there with my transfer orders in my pocket and a medal on my chest, I saw it differently. Harlan didn't own that flag. He never did. He just hid behind it. That flag belonged to the men like my father, who carried his scars in silence because he believed in something bigger than himself. It belonged to General Ross, who carried the grief of a lost daughter but still served with honor. It belonged to Sarah, who died trying to do the right thing. And it belonged to me. It represents the people who stand up when it's easier to sit down. It represents the people who speak the truth when the room is screaming for them to be quiet. I shifted the weight of the bag on my shoulder. A memory of my dad surfaced, clear as a bell. We were sitting on the porch of our old rental house, watching an old Western on a portable TV. He loved John Wayne. He loved the grit, the dust, and the simple code of the West. He used to tell me, "Hannah, courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway." I smiled, a genuine small smile that touched my eyes. I had been scared to death. I had been terrified in that library, trembling under the desk in the dark, and shaking in the conference room. But I had saddled up. I got on the horse, and I rode it straight into the storm. My story wouldn't make the history books. They wouldn't build a statue of an E4 computer technician in the town square. But in the barracks, late at night when the sergeants aren't around, the privates would whisper about it. They would tell the story of the mouse who took down a giant. They would know that rank doesn't equal righteousness and that the truth is a weapon that fits in any hand, no matter how small. A horn honked, pulling me from my thoughts. A dark government transport SUV pulled up to the curb. The driver, a corporal from the transport pool, leaned over and rolled down the window. "Sergeant Mills, transport to Raleigh-Durham Airport?" "That's me," I said. I threw my duffel bag into the back seat and climbed into the passenger side. The heater was blasting warm air. It felt good. As the car pulled away, I didn't look back at the headquarters building. I didn't look back at the server room where I'd almost lost everything. I looked forward, through the windshield, at the open road stretching out toward the highway. I touched the bronze hexagon pinned to my chest one last time, then smoothed out my uniform. The war at Fort Bragg was over, but the mission, the real mission of protecting the line between order and chaos, was just beginning. "You ready, Sergeant?" the driver asked, checking his mirrors. I looked at the horizon, where the road met the sky. "Yeah," I said softly. "Let's go. We have work to do." Before I sign off, I want to leave you with one thought from my own experience. For years, I let a title and a pay grade define my worth. I believed that because I was small, my voice didn't matter. But I learned the hard way that integrity is the only rank that truly counts. You might feel like a mouse in a world of giants right now, but remember, the truth is the great equalizer. You don't have to be fearless to make a difference. You just have to be willing to saddle up, even when your hands are shaking. Don't let anyone silence you. If my journey from the shadows of Fort Bragg to the halls of Cyber Command resonated with you, please hit that like button. It helps share this message of courage with others who might be fighting their own silent battles. I really want to hear your story in the comments. Have you ever had to stand your ground against someone more powerful than you? How did you handle it? Type, "I stand tall," down below to show that you are ready to do the right thing, no matter the cost. And please subscribe so we can ride into the next mission together. Stay safe out there.